if it's going to happen, it's going to happen right when most of the people are there. I'm trying to describe the traditional problem. The traditional business problem says that you are trying to initiate the project or the beginning of the project. And when everybody's excited about it, you're going to have a project kickoff meeting on day 1. And then days 2 through, well, whatever day, you're going to do a lot of waiting, provisioning resources, provisioning people, provisioning expertise, and then you're going to set up the environment. Have all of you been around setting up the environment when it has taken you a long, long time to set up the environment? If you know what I mean, it has taken you resources, time, and energy to set up your environment, to get things done. And it's not until you're done setting up your environment that you can even begin working. It's very possible that by the time you get to a point where you're beginning to work is way past the 90-day mark in a traditional setting. And what I mean by that is there's a few other things that you need to know about as I'm discussing this. What I mean by that, there is a common business, if you will, or the traditional business, I call it conundrum. And the traditional business conundrum, as I see it, has been a few things. Has been the timeline, how long it takes to get things done. Have you had deadlines associated with the projects that you look at and essentially go, ha ha ha, that's never gonna happen? Scope. Many times the scope as it is defined by the project is not accurate or is not complete. The resource specifications needed to get the set task done in a given timeline is incomplete. The schedule that has been presented to resources and to users essentially is unclear for more reasons than one. Production environment changes as time progresses. You know that. Scope creep, you've heard about that, haven't you? And as resources are provisioned over time, schedules change. And as a result, success of the project is elusive, where everything keeps getting redefined over and over and over again. And what I mean to say is, when I say redefined, is you might have to adjust your scope to meet the deadline, or you might have to adjust the deadline to meet the scope. Okay? So the business problem, as you're trying to work with it today, is solved by Azure. I kid you not. When you start the project on day 1, there's a project kickoff meeting. You can begin provisioning resources on day 2. There is no waiting for provisioning hardware, software, applications, infrastructure. You don't have to do any of that. Everything is kind of at your fingertips. You can begin provisioning the environment, set up the environment on day 2, prepare to work, set up your environment, maybe it's largely set up, and you can begin working on day 2 as well. So this time frame of project kickoff to begin working is still a day or 2. That doesn't change much in the cloud environment. There are a few other things that I think you will realize that I want to make you aware of. Cloud models provide you with a way to do, well, everything. And I think you'll know what I'm talking about here. There is, of course, our IaaS model, infrastructure as a service, where the IT admin is going to take care of provisioning resources for you, right? IT admin is going to provision resources for you. The problem is when IT admin is provisioning resources for you, in the traditional universe, they needed equipment, they needed hardware, they needed space. You remember this? They needed to actually build the equipment. That is not the case with Azure. Then there is the platform as a service, where the developer can begin building against the said resources provisioned by IT admin. And by the way, these resources right here are provisioned, and they can be provisioned in minutes. Many times it's self-service. As you'll see very soon when I begin to work with app service, it is all self-service. I'm not contacting somebody, emailing somebody, getting into a meeting with somebody, trying to understand how they can give me what I need, and then going back and forth, making sure that they are giving me exactly what I've asked for in terms of resources. And then you begin to do the development effort. The IT admin has done the resource provisioning for you, and then the user can begin using the product that you're going to put in place. This whole thing, depending on what you're accomplishing, may be the same day. In the case of, for example, a REST API, in the case of a web application, it really doesn't matter. All of it can be the same day. It could be storage, it could be VMs, it could be really anything. It would be provisioned on the same day. That in the physical world is really very difficult, if not impossible, to accomplish. With that being said, Azure App Service, as I like to say, is platform as a service. Okay? The web service, if you will, is platform as a service model. Right? So really what ends up happening is you are provisioning web service underneath app service. And I'll talk to you about what the difference is underneath app service, which is in the AWS world, something like a Elastic Beanstalk that allows you to scale. It's really awesome. You put a web app, mobile app, Azure Functions. Now, Azure Functions, by the way, are serverless, the Lambda environment in AWS. They allow you to begin development very, very quickly. Just by doing a click, 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 provision resources, and off you go. You're able to build web apps and mobile apps without having to worry about the underlying infrastructure. Yeah, you specify the OS, Windows or Linux. Yes, you specify what is called an app service plan. I'll talk to you about this as well, so that you can get moving. You can get moving very, very quickly. So what ends up happening here, as I like to say, is you end up creating what's called an app service plan. Okay, you end up creating an app service plan. An app service plan, you like this? Tears of joy. App service plan lets you select what kind of resources you need. You can change them anytime. You can start with the free tier, and you can basically move up to the production or isolated tiers. You can select what kind of machines you want, how many you want, how you want to scale, what your bandwidth is like, and you can change your mind later on. App service plans, you have a pipeline, DevOps pipeline support. There's multiple languages that are supported, multiple authentication sources that are supported. These right here, what I'm showing you right here in terms of the support for CI/CD pipelines, right? CI/CD pipelines, support for multiple languages that you're coding in, Node, PowerShell, .NET, Python, you name it. These and support for authentication schemes is something that we take for granted today. This is something that would have taken an army of resources to provision in the physical world. The tiers lets you select if you want the free or the low end tier for the purposes of dev and test. You can move from that to the production tier all the way up to the isolated tier where it is dedicated to you and your environment only, and anything in between depending on your needs. You may realize that when you are thinking about what you need to provision and what resources you're going to have in your environment as users come on the scene, as your application begins to be used, you realize that your resource needs will increase usually as time progresses. You change the tier that you're on, off you go. Really kind of a powerful note to make there for anybody that has been involved with in physical environment. You know how much headache this is helping you save. Once you have your application, you are able to change your mind, as they say. You are able to change your mind, or as I like to say, new version. You're able to create a new version. You can upload it utilizing FTP, use a package, use Git, use Cloud Sync, OneDrive, no problem, Google Drive. You're able to sync up your environment and upload any way you choose so that you can get the resources you need, the latest update you need to put in place. Right? Also, there's something called development slots. And this may seem, as I described them to you, deployment slots may seem like a lifesaver to many. So you can have a dev, test, QA, and prod deployment. Okay? You can have a dev, test, QA, and prod deployment. And you get to select which one you're going to use. You may have everything you're doing in development in one slot and production environment in a different slot. While you are testing over here, this can be in production. And if you like, you can flip-flop these. So once the test environment is ready, you can swap to the production slot immediately without losing any connections. Yeah, so the next iteration in the intelligence world of computing, the next iteration of the user that connects to that deployment slot is going to get the new production environment. I'm sure on many websites and many resources online, you have seen while you're logged in, the environment sometimes changes, the font sometimes changes, background changes, login changes, picture changes. I'm sure you've seen it many times over, and it's done on the fly without you having to lose anything you're doing. That's really what deployment slots are about. I can create deployment slots. I can create a Azure app service plan so that I can scale what I want. I can scale horizontally meaning I can scale up. I'm sorry, horizontally meaning I can scale out, and vertically meaning I can scale up. So horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. Vertical scaling means that I'm going to add more resources to existing nodes, and horizontally means I'm going to add more nodes. So I can scale out, add more nodes, or I can scale up, add resources to existing node, RAM, processor, disk, network, whatever the case may be. I'm able to scale on demand, dynamically, or manually as I choose, depending on my app service plan will dictate what I'm going to do. All right, so let's get to a demonstration, if you will, on exactly what I am talking about. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a app service, right? And I have a couple here. Now I'm going to create a new app service, and you're going to see it's asking me some details about my web app. Notice that. I first specify a resource group. In AWS, you know how you can tag things and that assign the tag values to resource groups? This is the same exact way. I can create a new resource group. I can call it Azure Demo Monday, right? Today. I can click OK. Now, everything that I put inside of this resource group, I'm going to put my web app and I'm going to put my functions inside of this resource group, will allow me to organize, manage, secure, provide access, reject access, along with get insights into what's happening in this resource group as a unit. Okay, my web app name, Web App Monday. Okay, so I can have it published in code, or I can use Docker container. I don't want to use Docker container. I'm going to use code. Now look over here. Azure Web App Monday.azurewebsites.net is how it's going to provision initially. I can, of course, register my own custom domain name so that I can register it there. I'll talk to you about that so you can see where that is being done. I then specify my runtime stack, what I'm going to be coding in: Net, Java, Node, PHP, Python, or Ruby. Okay, so I get to select. In my case, I'm going to do a .NET 5. I specify my region. Yeah, depending on the region, the services are going to be available to me. Right, the service plan. Right over here is my app service plan, all important app service plan. App service plan is where I get to specify my resources. Now, what I want to show you is sometimes the point of a lot of confusion for those coming into Azure for the first time. And let me share with you what I mean with regards to what you're going to see here. There's something called Azure Compute Units, okay? Azure Compute Units, ACU. Okay. Azure Compute Units, okay? Azure Compute Unit is a made-up metric, if you will, but it makes it easy to gauge relative performance without knowing the specific hardware details. You know what I like to compare this to? Horsepower. It cracks me up though, because the space shuttle is 3 million horsepower. Are we really still gauging that on horses? But you get the drift though. If a car is 200 horsepower, it has twice as much relative power as the 100 horsepower car, and so on. So it is a relative metric. It lets you gauge the power of the machine under normal circumstances. Okay, so ACU rating of 200, for example, is going to have twice as fast as an ACU rating of 100. More specifically, if you want to determine max ACU performance, simply multiply the number of cores against the ACU rating in the series. Here's an example of D and DSV2. If you notice, vCPU in DSV2, the vCPU in DSV2 is approximately 35% faster than the D series, okay? 35% faster than the D series. That's kind of how it's gauged, if you will. Okay, so the max CPU performance, the max ACU performance, Azure Compute Units, multiply the number of cores against the ACU rating. All right, just to keep that in mind, as I'm showing you, I'm going to create a new service plan. I'm going to call it Azure. I'm going to call it Azure Monday Plan. And I'm going to click Demo. I'm going to click OK. Okay, and I'm going to change size over here. Let's take a look at this. So this is the spec picker. Here is the dev test service plan. As you can see, I have selected the F1 right here. F1 says that I am going to be given 1 gigs of RAM, 60 minutes a day of compute power, versus in the shared instance. Notice right here, I'm going to be given 1 gigs of RAM, 240 minutes a day. It's not free anymore. Or the 100 ACU Azure Compute Unit, which is going to give me 1.75 gigs of RAM. And my costs go up too. But however, if you look in the shared plan, I have no other option. It just gives me memory and storage. In the shared infrastructure, which is a D1 plan, I'm able to select my own custom domain. I still get memory and storage. In the B1 plan, I'm able to scale it for up to 3 instances. Look at that right there. I'm able to manually scale this to 3 instances immediately. All right. So that's the F1, which gives me no ability to scale. D1 gives me a custom domain, but I still can't scale, or 100 total ACUs, which allows me to scale up to 3 instances if I go to production. Notice the options I have here. Here's the P1V2. I'm given 210 ACUs down to 195 maximum ACUs, VPUs. There's 32 gigs of RAM, and features that go along with each of my selections. Here's the staging slots. Okay, so the deployment slots get added on in the production features. If I go over here to dev test, I have no ability to have deployment slots in production. If I scroll down, I get staging slots, which are my deployment slots. I'm able to get testing and deployments before I swap them into production, which is what swaps are. And I have the ability in production to auto scale. You see this right here? I can auto scale in this particular case up to 20 instances. If I go over here to 400 ACUs, I have more resources. I can have backups done. So depending on what plan I choose, I get different ability and different scaling options. Here's an isolated for advanced networking. If I want the i3v2 environment, as you can see, I have 1 terabyte of storage available to me. I have memory per instance available to run applications. I get traffic manager. I get scale. I can scale up to 100 instances, and I can even request more than that. I can also request other features like an isolated network, a single tenant system, and so on. So dev test, I'm going to select shared instance, which gives me no ability to have a deployment slot, and I can build from there. So I'm going to do an apply over here on the shared instance, right here, shared. See this free F1 instance? I click next, go to deployment. Right here, I can select that I want to enable continuous deployment, and I can use, for example, I can use my Git repo. I can create a new branch. I can create a new repo, whatever I choose, allowing me to update right from Git if I so choose. I can go to monitoring, and I can enable monitoring. So if I want application insights about my environment, if I enable app insights, I'll be able to see what users are doing, what my application and how it's performing, where my peaks and valleys are in terms of performance, who is able to interact, and other aspects of my application, my web environment, very, very easily. Okay, so that's the application insights. Then I tag. Now, I like to tag everything for the purposes of billing. Azure Demo Monday. Okay. Azure Live Demo. Okay. I can take away the Azure part. Demo Monday Rafiq. Live Demo Rafiq. Right. And the resources that are selected on this. So it's going to tag this. Now, this is really helpful when I want to see billing. I want to see exactly what's happening in the billing environment. I'm able to see what I tagged with what so that I can keep track of what I'm using. I click next to review create. And then, of course, after this, as you can see right here, I can begin to create this. I just do a create. It goes out and creates the web app for me based on the Azure service plan, just the way I suggested, the app service plan, just the way I suggested. And it's going to come up with a site for me that I can publish my site to. So I'll show you what I have in terms of my site. So you can see what I'm going to deploy. And what my app does. Doesn't really do very much other than say hello. All right. All right. Okay, here it is. It's telling me it's done. It's telling me I can go to resource. When I go to resource, look right here. You'll see in a second. There is my URL. You see that? Azure Web App Monday. Okay. If I open that link right now, it's going to tell me that you're ready to begin developing. Okay, so here it is. Here's the app service. I basically created this resource. I haven't configured anything. And I'm on the free tier. Here's a project, as you can see, the GitHub project if I want to do updates. And it tells me that I've got insights. I'm able to diagnose problems if there are any. There's App Service Advisor available to me. And I'm able to begin working right away. So this is what I see right now. Here is my project. And I'm going to go over to publish right here. And I'm going to create a new location to publish. My target is going to be Azure App Service. And here's my Azure Demo Monday. You see it right here. I click next. I'm going to publish. I'm going to click finish. And it's going to set that up. set that up. I'm going to click publish, and it's going to go off publishing this. The publishing has begun. The publishing project has begun. And you'll see it's going to happen pretty quickly. And it's going to publish, well, my site over to that web app location, the link that I've gotten. Okay, so the publishing succeeded. There we go. I'm going to go over to my Azure site. Okay. And I'm going to wait for the publish to work. There you go. It's refreshing. It's bringing up the page. There we are. So there is my published site. Right. If I go back to my site, I change this from version 9 to version 11, and I go over and I publish this again. Go over and I publish this again right here. Click publish, off it goes. And I'm expecting to see version 11 once it's done. Right. Publishing is started, publishing succeeded. Right. Go back, do a refresh, and there's version 11. Yeah, it's that simple. Okay, I'm able to make a change. Now, if I had this in slots, I wouldn't have to worry about publishing and republishing. I can simply swap from my development slot over to my production slot in real time. Okay, without losing any connection. So so if I do a today in Azure for all of us, make a big change. You want to call it that? Go ahead and publish. Make sure that I get the update. All right. Wait till the publishing succeeds. Look on the bottom there, publishing succeeded. Go back, do a refresh, and there we go. All right. So that is Azure Web Service being published. Okay, that is Azure Web Service being published, and the Azure Service Plan, the App Service Plan that allows me to do that. So what did I just do? What did I just do? There are a few more things I want to talk to you about before I get to the function piece. So what I did is I talked to you about the app service. Okay, the app service. I spoke to you about the plans that are available. This is where the magic happens, where you're able to select how you want to scale. I talked to you about the deployment slots aspect, right? The deployment slots aspect that lets you swap dev to prod without losing any connectivity. Yeah, and then I also demonstrated creating a web service for you. Okay, I created a web service for you and then I published it utilizing Visual Studio. All right, and all inside of a single resource group. Okay, all inside of a single resource group. So my web service is inside of a resource group, Azure App Monday, Azure Demo Monday, that I can use and build. Okay, so that's the first piece that I want to share with you. Now, as you are performing these updates, you are going to get notifications in your email or whatever alerts you specify, letting you know that there are builds happening, the builds that have succeeded, the builds that have failed, or why they have succeeded or why they have failed. You'll be able to see those aspects. All right. The next piece I want to talk to you about is Azure Functions. Azure Functions. Now, functions are serverless. Okay. So in the case of web service, where we had to define which environment I'm going to be creating the web service in, Windows or Linux, I don't have to do that with functions. What are functions? They're essentially set off, they're created, and they're kicked off utilizing a trigger. Now, the beautiful thing here is that if you want to send out an alert, if you want to process some kind of an audit, you want to run maybe a REST API, and because one of them is an HTTP trigger, maybe you want to run something in PowerShell that serves as a HTTP trigger. Maybe you want to run some code in a message queue of sorts. Maybe you want to call a function, it's a serverless environment based on a trigger to kick off a deployment. Maybe you want to adjust the image of a picture as it is coming into a particular storage slot. Whatever the case may be, you can use a function for. It is extremely powerful and it's very, very easy to use. And because it's serverless, you have really no provisioning need, no provisioning of hardware or OS to worry about, which means the attack surface is reduced. You get that drift, don't you? Attack surface is reduced, management and maintenance is reduced. The service is essentially going to kick off based on a given trigger. So let me show you how a function is created and how a function is utilized inside of Azure. Here we go. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go over to my app service. Notice over here, this is my app service. I'm going to select function app right here. Okay. I have got one function app, but I'm going to create a new one. The thing is, you create a function app, and then you essentially create functions, plural, inside of that app. No provisioning of an operating system is needed. So I'm going to select my resource group, which is Azure Demo Monday. I'm going to call my function PS Demo Func. Okay, it's going to be in code. I'm not having to specify an operating system, as you can see. I am not having to specify anything else. I can specify my runtime stack, what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to do it in PowerShell Core. I could use .NET or Node.js or Python or Java or other custom handler if I choose. I'm going to use PowerShell Core. Yes, I'm going to be using version 7. And what my region is. Okay? No operating system needed here. I don't know if you noticed this or not. Let me go back here. I'm not going to save this. Let me go back here. When I create an app service, and I create a new app service, notice right here, here's the Linux Windows right here. See that? Windows, Linux, right? And I also have to select my service plan right here. Notice that? So in this case, I've got some back-end thing that I got to specify, platform as a service, relying on Windows, okay? Or Linux, if you will. But that's not the case when I am picking, I don't want to save this. That's not the case when I'm picking a function. When I create a function, I specify my resource group that I'm going to put it in. I'm going to say Rafiq Func Monday. Yeah. Code, specify I'm going to do it in PowerShell Core. Okay. 7.0, Central US is my region. I click next for hosting. Now you need a storage account because that's really a general purpose storage account that the function uses to manage its environment. Okay. This is on the back end. Okay. This is on the back end, and this is my plan type. Yes, I want it to be serverless. I can use it. I can use Functions Premium, or I can choose an app service plan. App service plan if I really wanted to scale this, but I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to specify a serverless consumption on the back end. Okay, this is on the back end. I can choose Windows or Linux, but I don't have to worry about the VM, if you will, or the VM hardware, if you will. If I happen to select a service plan and I select my app service plan, whatever that may be, I can change the size depending on what I'm expecting the traffic to be. I'm going to leave it at free in this case. I'm going to go to the networking aspect. I'm not going to do anything here. I'm going to go to monitoring. I can enable application insights for my service, how much they are used, how they are being accessed, who they're being accessed by, what the maximum utilization is. I can do all of that utilizing insights. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to go over to tags. I'm going to go func Rafiq Monday Rafiq func 01. Click review create functions. Okay, and all I'm going to do now is I'm going to create it. Now this is going to take a couple of minutes, but what ends up happening is my API details. That's why I created one. Here is in this case, the function that it built, okay, that I've got built already. And here is the functions right here. See that? Functions right there. Inside of the functions app, it creates and allows me to create a function. Inside of the function app, it lets me create a function. So I created a function called trigger. I'm going to create a new one, create. Okay, so you create a function app, and then you create a function trigger. And here are the triggers you have available: an HTTP trigger, a timer trigger like a cron job in Linux, an Azure queue storage service bus, queue or topic, blob storage trigger, event hub trigger, Cosmos database trigger, and IoT hub trigger, send grid, event grid, maybe durable function starter trigger, activity in the durable functions, orchestrator that's available right there, Kafka, RabbitMQ, and the signal R negotiated HTTP trigger. Depending on what kind of trigger I want, will be what's created as a shell for me in PowerShell. Because I selected PowerShell, I'm going to select HTTP trigger. Okay, I'm going to click create, and here it is creating an HTTP trigger. It's going to call it HTTP trigger. You'll see in a second. Here it is, HTTP trigger. I click on code and test. I click on code and test. So here is the HTTP trigger at the moment. It's a PowerShell HTTP trigger. Okay, and I'm going to do a test run. Test run, as you can see right here. This is the input Azure. Now this is using name right here. Notice the name is Azure, and I've got my testing and running. I can get the function URL right there. Okay, I can go to integration, and I can choose to integrate this with other areas, telling me how it's integrated. I can monitor this if I so choose. I don't have Insights configured, but I can configure Insights to monitor my function. I can choose function keys and how I want to perhaps allow or not allow to access the function. So this is my code and my test in this particular instance. Right there. And I'm going to go over here, do a test run. And if I just change this name, for example, if I just change this name to Rafiq and I click run, here it is on the right, on the left, on the bottom, it's connected, it's running, and this is what comes back. Right? Let me show you something. Let me show you something. I'm going to get the function URL right there. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to paste go to the function URL. Come on, copy the function URL. I'm going to paste the function URL. Okay, and this is the function executing without passing any parameters. Okay, if I pass a parameter right here, okay, there you go. Hello, Rafiq. HTTP triggered function successfully. Okay, so this is a very easy to create function. Notice right here is telling me exactly what went on. Here's simple PowerShell code that's making it possible for me to make changes if I want right here, as you can see. Okay, my trigger, exactly the function that I created, and being able to run the trigger function utilizing a URL and passing a name parameter to it. Nice and easy. Now imagine how much you can do if you were able to trigger a function to accomplish deployment tasks, to accomplish changes that are made to a table, to accomplish sending out alerts, emails, to managing and manipulating images, or storing or doing backups. Whatever the case may be, you can create a trigger for within a function. A single function app can have multiple functions in them, and I can have multiple triggers created individually based on functions performing different tasks within a function app. So that is functions, and that is web app inside of app service. You don't need app service to run functions. You can run them by themselves, but this is kind of where they are usually utilized. Okay, so functions, web service, and creation and manipulation of the function app, and creation and manipulation of a web application as well. Now, another thing is that if I go over to resources, notice right over here, I've got these 3 Azure Demo Monday in the resource group. If I click on the Azure Demo Monday, I get my resource groups. I get my items in the resource group. And as I'm in this resource group, I end up seeing over here the activity log, okay, of what's going on. I'm also able to see who I want to give access to. Right now, I've given access to everybody because it's wide open, but I can control access and I can add roles and assign access. I've got tags assigned to this. I can have a resource visualizer that takes a while to bring up. I can show events if I really want to. I can, here's my deployments, the first one that failed, okay, that one that succeeded. Security that I can implement inside of this resource group, who does and doesn't have access. Policies that I can implement inside of this, whether it's compliant or not with various different policies if I so want, right? Other properties I can enable, and such as what the name is, what the location is, the location ID and resource ID and so on. Cost analysis I can do. Application insights, if I have that enabled, it will tell me what's happening within this resource group, how it's being utilized, because based on the application insights, I can determine if I want to scale out or scale up and what my needs are. Remember that app service plan that lets me pick deployment, lets me pick the development, production, or an isolated environment in the app service plan? That app service plan, I can change and manipulate dynamically so that I can handle my production level traffic. So that's really what this ends up doing for us. It takes away a lot of the headache. It takes away a lot of the overhead. It takes away a lot of the what ifs. Do you know what I'm saying about what ifs? Will this work? Will the service work? Are only allowed users have access to the service? What is being written to? What's coming out of it? Web application? I'm sure all of you are aware that in order to be able to provision services, in order to be able to provision web applications, under traditional circumstances, you need hardware, infrastructure, routers, switches, gateway, firewall, DMZ placement, along with the OS, and then building out your web server, building out your application, writing to it, and having a separate environment for dev, test, and prod. This can be done very, very quickly, as you can see. With a few clicks, I'm able to create an app service, be able to create a web service inside of an app service, create an app service plan, create a web service inside of that app service plan, create a function if I want, and basically produce my web application, whether it's for a traditional web app or a mobile web app, or I can write and create functions if I choose. All right. So what I was trying to show you also, if you noticed, is explain to you the differences between Azure service units, right? Azure compute units, and Azure compute units are the relative measure, if you will, of how the box, if you will perform, the box, the hardware or the infrastructure will perform relative to other boxes that are given a lower value, right? So as I was trying to say, something with an ACU of 180 will not perform as well as something that has a ACU of 210. And we were talking about the relative productivity, if you will. So here's the total ACU, and then based on the instance, right? So, and you want to determine max ACU performance, you simply multiply the number of cores against the ACU rating for the series. So that's why you're able to see that this is approximately 35% faster than the original D series, okay? ACUs, web app service plan, web services, web applications, application services, and functions. All right? Do you have any questions for me that I can help answer or clarify on what I have discussed?
It looks like we've been staying on top of them pretty well, but folks, if you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and this will be a good time to get them answered. I think there was a request to demo deployment slots in action if you have time for that, but we might not have time. We did send them a couple links.
Yeah, I don't have time for it. It'll take a little bit, but I can certainly produce a little clip and share it with everybody. It is exactly what it sounds like, the ability to be able to swap prod for dev, and you decide how many prod and how many dev slots, how many QA slots you want, and that is relatively easy to show as well. I think you'll be able to appreciate the amount of effort it takes to get a deployment and a development and a production and a QA slot, if you will, opened. That's where this comes in extremely helpful and extremely handy, because you're able to click, 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 and be sure that you don't lose anything in translation when you go from a development slot to a production slot. Since development slots and production slots are both hot, if you will, you're able to swap between them and not lose any connectivity.
I think that we're good for questions, if that's, let's see. You know, one question just came in. I don't know if you can really speak to this in detail, but what are the main differences with the same AWS features? I mean, if you had to describe the difference between Elastic Beanstalk and App Service, what would you say?
How did I know? How did I know I was going to be asked that? Okay, so I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight here. The biggest con of Beanstalk is that charges on Beanstalk appear automatically after you exceed the free quota. Okay, there are lots of moving parts with Beanstalk, and sometimes, depending on your needs, the deployment of Beanstalk, the scale, may be slower. And I have seen that depending on the architectural scenario, which is not the case with App Service. Okay, this whole moving parts business, there are fewer moving parts, more in terms of being able to get production out there and being able to adjust dramatically. So those are some of the big things now in Beanstalk. You know, you can upload applications and you get load balancing features and scaling features, right? But in the case of AWS, you're able to meet very, very rigorous needs without a lot of moving parts as you are configuring your app service plans. When you configure a production app service plan or an isolated app service plan, you can basically set it and forget it. It will be done very quickly for you. So those are just some of the things I see side by side, if you will.
Cool, thank you. I think one last question here. And sort of interesting question. Is there anything special to know about using Node.js with Azure? I've seen a lot of Node with Azure. We use a lot of it. So any tips or tricks in particular there?
No, you know, this used to be a very touchy topic 10 years ago. It's really not today. Node.js is used all over the place. You can use it natively in Azure as you do in your normal local environment. Nothing really special about that. Just have to be mindful of the security on the back end. Perhaps storage and web applications are hitting on the back end, no different than anything else. So nothing really special about Node.js. Node.js doesn't really have any specific written features you have to worry about in Azure. There's no Azure Node.js, if you will. So nothing really special from a production environment, if you will. Right? You can actually move and migrate from a dev test to prod really quickly. And if you have an existing Node.js environment, you can move very comfortably and very confidently into the Azure environment very quickly. I've done it many times over.
Well, I think we are good for questions and then good for today. And thanks a ton for your passion. Some nice comments about that in the chat. And we will see you tomorrow. And everyone, please do register for tomorrow's session if you haven't already. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.